6.3, best measure of central tendency mastery check. Number 1 says, the math scores of several students in Cole's 7th grade class are shown below. Which statistic, mean, median, or mode, best describes the data set and why? Well, when we're trying to figure out if mean, median, or mode is best for a data set, the first thing we need to think about is what we are trying to say about this data set, or what we're trying to answer. The question says, which one best describes the data set? Well, if we're describing a bunch of test scores, we're trying to get a rough estimate of the typical amount, the typical score on that test. So I'm going to look at this decision chart over here that we have. The question that we're trying to answer about our data is, what is a rough estimate of the typical amount? So then we ask ourselves, are there outliers? Well, I'm going to look through these test scores. I'm seeing numbers in the 80s and 90s. There's one that's 65, way lower than the rest. And an outlier is a number that stands out from the rest of the data as being way different. So when there is an outlier, remember that we want to use the median, because with the median, you get a rough estimate of the typical amount, but it is not affected by outliers because you just cross those outliers out when you find the median. So our answer here would be median, because I'm not going to write this all down, but median is best because it gives you a rough estimate of the typical amount without being affected by the outlier 65. So I'll just type this here for you. Maybe. All right, so there you have that answer. Median is the best statistic to describe this data set because it gives us a rough estimate of the typical value without being affected by the outlier 65. Let's go ahead and look at number 2. Number 2 says the high temperatures for the past 7 days in Denver are shown below. Which statistic best describes this data set and why? Again, we're looking at some temperatures. We want to know a rough estimate of the typical temperature. So again, we're going to go to the left side of this decision chart. So we ask then, are there outliers? Well, 54, 49, 52, 48, 50, 51, 53, those are all pretty close together. So no, there are not outliers. And when that's the case, we want to use the mean, because the mean tells us a rough estimate of the typical amount by using the most information. It uses all of those numbers when you calculate the mean. All right, and you can see my answer right there. Mean is the best statistic to describe this data set because it gives us a rough estimate of the typical amount and uses all of the information to do so, meaning you add up all of the scores and divide by, or all of the temperatures and divide by how many there are. There are no outliers to affect the mean, so mean is best. Let's go to number 3. The following numbers are written on cards that are in a fishbowl. Mrs. B is going to draw one out to win a Kindle Fire. Which statistic best describes the most likely number to be picked? Well, now we have a different question. We're asking which one describes the most likely number to be picked. So we no longer want a rough estimate of what's typical. We want which one appears the most. That's all we care about, which one is there the most. So we're going to use the mode to find the most common number. So we would look through here and find the mode as our statistic. All right, and there's my answer. Mode is best because it tells you which number appears the most. The number that appears the most is also the number that is most likely to be picked.